The war between humans and the Zeren had been brief. It was not a war of destruction, but a misunderstanding that had grown too large. Now, peace had been declared, and to show goodwill, the Zeren made an unusual offering. Paul stood in the command hall of the human station, watching as the Zeren delegation presented their gift. She was a young woman with silver-blue skin and dark violet eyes. Her long, silken hair reached past her shoulders, and though she stood tall, there was something cautious in her stance, like she was always prepared to run. "This is Elira," the Zeren leader announced. "She was taken during the conflict. Now she belongs to you, as a token of peace." Paul's stomach turned. He was an officer in the human fleet, not a ruler or owner of anyone. The idea of receiving a person as a gift felt wrong. He glanced at his superior, Commander Grant, who only gave him a nod, as if accepting this was part of duty. Paul sighed and stepped forward. "I accept," he said, though the words tasted bitter. Elira did not look at him. She kept her gaze forward, her face unreadable. Paul could only wonder what she was thinking. Paul's quarters were simple, just a small living space with a bed, a chair, and a table. He had not expected to share it with someone, especially not like this. "You can stay here," he said, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. "I don't expect anything from you. You're free to move around." Elira finally looked at him, her violet eyes searching his face. "You do not command me." Her voice was smooth but distant. "No," Paul said. "I don't believe in that." She did not respond, but something in her expression changed slightly. Paul did not press further. Instead, he placed a folded set of clean clothes on the table. "These might fit you," he said. "If you need anything, just ask." Elira stared at the clothes for a moment before taking them carefully. She walked toward the small sleeping area, but did not close the door behind her. Paul took it as a sign that she did not fully trust him yet. He could not blame her. Days passed, and Elira remained quiet. She did not speak unless necessary. She did not eat when Paul was watching. She moved like a shadow, always aware of her surroundings. Paul pretended not to notice, giving her space. One evening, as he worked on his datapad, he heard a sound behind him. He turned to see Elira standing near the table, staring at a small device that displayed pictures. "You have a family," she said, her voice soft. Paul nodded. "My sister and my nephew," he said. "I visit them when I can." Elira tilted her head slightly, as if she did not fully understand the concept. "Do you have family?" Paul asked, careful not to push too hard. Elira hesitated, then shook her head. "Not anymore." Silence filled the room. Paul did not ask more. Instead, he returned to his work, letting her decide if she wanted to speak again. One day, Paul entered his quarters to find Elira studying the food dispenser. She pressed a few buttons but stepped back when nothing happened. "Need help?" Paul asked. Elira glanced at him but did not answer. Paul moved beside her, pressing the correct sequence. The machine hummed, and a tray appeared with warm food. Elira looked at him, then at the tray. "Why do you help me?" Paul exhaled, leaning against the counter. "Because you didn't choose this," he said. "You were given to me like an object. But you're not an object. You're a person." Elira blinked, as if she had not expected such an answer. She took the tray carefully and walked to the table. For the first time, she ate without waiting for him to leave. That night, Paul lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He had never questioned orders before, but this situation felt different. The Zeren had given Elira away as if she were nothing more than a prize. Did they truly believe that was acceptable, or was this just their way of ending the conflict? He turned his head slightly and saw Elira sitting near the small window, looking out at the stars. She did not move, but her shoulders were tense. Paul sat up. "You miss your home." Elira's fingers curled slightly against her knees. "Home is gone," she whispered. Paul felt a pang of sympathy. He did not know what had happened to her world, but he did not need details to understand her pain. "If you could go anywhere," he asked, "where would you go?" Elira was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, she turned to look at him. "I don't know," she admitted. Paul gave her a small nod. "Maybe we'll figure it out together." For the first time since she arrived, Elira gave a hint of a smile. It was small, barely there, but it was real. And for the first time, Paul felt that maybe this arrangement was not just a mistake. Maybe it was a beginning. The soft hum of the space station was the only sound as Paul sipped his morning coffee. Elira sat across from him, her sharp violet eyes studying the datapad he had left on the table. The silence between them had become familiar, not uncomfortable, but watchful, like two travelers who had yet to decide if they were friends or strangers. "You can use that," Paul said, nodding toward the datapad. "It has information about the station. And, well, anything you want to know." Elira's fingers brushed the screen carefully, as if touching something fragile. "You trust me with your knowledge?" she asked softly. Paul smiled. "Knowledge isn't something to lock away. Besides, I thought you might be curious." Elira paused, her eyes scanning through articles on human customs, languages, and even recipes. "Curious," she repeated. "That is a human word. My people do not value curiosity. They value strength and order." Paul leaned back in his chair. "Curiosity is how we grow," he said. "It's how we understand each other." Elira glanced up briefly, her gaze flickering with something, perhaps interest, or perhaps confusion. The hours passed quietly. Elira moved through the quarters with slow, careful steps. She opened cabinets, observed the food dispenser, and even stared at Paul's bookshelf, though she did not touch anything. At one point, she paused near a framed photo on the wall. It was of Paul and his sister, Mira, laughing together during a trip to a green forest. "This is your family," Elira said, her voice soft. Paul nodded, stepping beside her. "Yes, my sister, Mira. She's a scientist, always asking questions about the universe." He chuckled. "She'd probably ask you 1,000 questions if she were here." Elira's eyes lingered on the photo. "You miss her?" Paul's smile faded into something more thoughtful. "Yeah," he admitted, "but she's safe on Earth, and that's what matters." Later that day, a sudden alarm echoed through the station. Paul's communicator buzzed. "Lieutenant Paul, there's a power disruption in Section 4. You're closest. Can you handle it?" "On it," Paul replied, already moving. Elira watched him reach for his tools. "Do you require assistance?" she asked unexpectedly. Paul hesitated. "You know how to handle power systems." Elira's eyes narrowed slightly. "Zeran ships are more advanced than human ones," she said simply. "I understand machines." Paul considered this for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's go." The control room in Section 4 was dim, flickering with unstable power. Sparks crackled from an exposed panel. "The relay is overloaded," Paul muttered, kneeling to inspect it. "I need to bypass the secondary circuit." Before he could finish, Elira was already moving. She slipped past him, her fingers dancing over the control panel with smooth precision. Within moments, the power stabilized. The lights flickered once, then glowed steadily. Paul stared. That was fast. Elira stood and brushed her hands lightly. "Your systems are simple," she said, though her voice carried no insult, only observation. Paul grinned. "Remind me to call you next time something breaks." Elira tilted her head. "Is that trust?" Paul's smile softened. "Yeah, I guess it is." When they returned to the quarters, Paul offered her a cup of warm tea. She took it cautiously, examining the liquid before taking a small sip. Elira spoke without looking at him. "You are different from what I expected." Paul raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" Elira's eyes met his briefly. "When the Zeran gave me to you, I thought I would be treated as property. I expected chains, commands. But you—" She paused, as if searching for the right words. You treat me with care. It is unfamiliar. Paul set his cup down, his voice gentle but firm. That's because you're not a prisoner here. You never were. Elira looked down into her tea, her expression unreadable. But her voice was softer when she replied. Then what am I? Paul hesitated but then spoke plainly. I don't know. But maybe a friend. Elira blinked, the word hanging between them like something fragile and new. Friend, she repeated softly, as if testing the shape of the word. The station's quiet was broken by a sudden chime from the door. Paul opened it to see Commander Grant's imposing figure. Grant's eyes swept the room and landed on Elira. She's unrestrained, he said, his voice cold. Paul's jaw tightened. There's no need for restraints. Grant stepped inside, his boots heavy on the floor. You're too soft, Paul. She's an alien, not a guest. You don't know what she's capable of. Elira's expression shifted instantly, her body tensing, eyes sharp and cold. But she said nothing. Paul's voice was steady but firm. She fixed the Section 4 power relay today. Saved us time and trouble. She's helping, not hurting. Grant's gaze hardened. You're playing a dangerous game, Lieutenant. Remember where your loyalty lies. He turned his eyes toward Elira. And you, remember your place. Elira's eyes burned with quiet defiance, but she remained silent. As Grant left, Paul exhaled, the tension heavy in the air. When the door slid shut, Elira spoke, her voice tight. Your commander fears me. Paul rubbed his temple. Grant fears what he doesn't understand, and he doesn't understand you. Elira's fingers curled against her palm. He is wrong about me. Paul met her gaze. I know. A silence stretched between them. This time, not cold, but charged with something unspoken. Finally, Elira's voice was soft, but clear. You stood up for me. Paul nodded. I told you, you're not a prisoner here. Elira looked at him for a long moment, and then, barely noticeable, the corner of her lips curved slightly. Perhaps, she said softly, you are not what I expected either. The station's artificial morning cycle brought a soft glow to the quarters. Paul sat at the table, flipping through reports on his datapad, while Elira stood by the window, her violet eyes fixed on the endless stars beyond. The silence between them felt different now. Not cold, not awkward, just comfortable. Suddenly, a sharp beep came from Paul's communicator. Lieutenant, the air filtration system on Deck 3 is malfunctioning. Can you handle it? Paul glanced at Elira. Want to help me with another repair? Elira's lips pressed together, but there was a flicker of interest in her eyes. If your systems are as simple as before, I suppose. Paul grinned. I'll take that as a yes. Deck 3 was warm and smelled faintly of metal and ozone. The filtration unit's control panel flashed red, warning of a pressure imbalance. Hall knelt beside the open panel, tools in hand. Looks like the coolant pipe is blocked. I'll need to flush it manually. Elira crouched beside him, her gaze scanning the wiring. This relay is poorly connected, she observed, her fingers brushing the cables. A mistake in your design. Paul chuckled. Well, we humans aren't perfect. Feel free to show me a better way. Elira paused, then carefully adjusted the relay. The warning light blinked and turned green. Paul blinked. You just reversed the charge flow. Elira finished calmly. The blockage cleared itself. Paul shook his head, impressed. Remind me not to argue with you about machines. Elira stood, her expression unreadable. Machines are logical. They follow patterns. People are less predictable. Paul smiled up at her. Yeah, people are complicated, but that's what makes them interesting. Back in their quarters, Elira surprised Paul by sitting across from him at the table. She had brought one of his books from the shelf, a human history text. You read? Paul asked, raising an eyebrow. Elira gave a small nod. I'd learn. Paul set his datapad aside. Find anything interesting? Alira's voice was thoughtful. Your people, you fight many wars. Yet you also create art, music, and compassion. She looked up at him. You are contradictions. Paul leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Humans are complicated. We can be terrible, but we can also be kind. I guess we're always learning to. Alira's eyes softened, but her voice dropped to a whisper. The Zeren do not forgive mistakes. You are different. Paul's voice was gentle. And you? What do you believe? Alira's fingers traced the edge of the book. I do not know. Once I believed strength was everything. But now I see there is another kind of strength. Paul smiled softly, like the strength to trust someone. Alira hesitated, her gaze meeting his. Perhaps. The moment was broken by a sudden chime from the door. Paul frowned. Who? The door slid open to reveal Commander Grant, his sharp eyes sweeping the room before landing on Alira. Lieutenant, Grant's voice was cold. A Zeren ship has requested entry to the station. They're here. For her. Alira's posture stiffened instantly, her eyes flashing with something Paul hadn't seen before. Fear. Paul's voice hardened. For what reason? Grant folded his arms. They say she was taken by mistake. They want her back. Alira's voice was cold, but there was a tremor beneath it. They do not come to rescue me. They come to silence me. Paul felt a chill. What do you mean? Alira's fists clenched tightly. I know something they want buried. If I return, they will ensure I never speak of it. Grant's eyes narrowed. This is a political matter. She is Zeren. It's not our place to interfere. Paul's jaw tightened. She's under my protection. Grant's voice dropped dangerously. Are you willing to risk your career for her, Lieutenant? Paul's eyes burned with resolve. Yes. The door slid shut as Grant left, tension thick in the room. Alira's voice was low. You did not have to do that. Paul's gaze softened. Yes, I did. Alira turned away, her shoulders tense. You are a fool, she said, but her voice wavered. Paul stepped closer. Maybe, but I trust you, and I won't let them take you. Alira's breath caught, and for a moment, her defenses cracked. You are strange, Paul, she whispered. No human, no Zeren has ever stood for me before. Paul's voice was gentle but firm. Then maybe it's time someone did. That night, Alira did not retreat to her corner of the room. Instead, she sat by the window, the soft starlight casting a silver glow over her face. Paul, sitting across from her, broke the silence. You said they want to silence you. Why? Alira's voice was slow, careful. Before the war, I worked in Zeren communications. I intercepted a message. A plan to provoke your forces into battle. The war was not an accident. It was a test. To measure human strength. Paul's expression darkened. So they started the war on purpose. Alira nodded, her eyes heavy. But I was captured before I could share this with anyone. They do not want peace. They want to know if you are a threat. Paul's fists clenched, but he forced himself to breathe. And now, they want to cover their tracks. Alira looked at him, something vulnerable in her gaze. I do not expect you to help me. This is not your war. Paul's voice was steady. It became my war when they put you in the middle of it. Alira's eyes searched his, and for the first time, something broke free from the walls around her heart. Softly, she spoke words that felt both new and old. You are different from anyone I have known. Paul smiled gently. And you are different from anyone I've ever met. Alira's lips pressed together, but her voice softened. Perhaps we are not so different, after all. The station's alert system hummed softly in the background, but Paul's heart pounded loudly in his chest. Alira stood by the window, her arms crossed tightly, her violet eyes distant with worry. Paul broke the silence. "The Zeren ship will dock soon. We don't have much time." Alira's voice was guarded. "If they take me, you will be safe. Your commander will not blame you." Paul's eyes flashed with determination. "I'm not worried about myself. I'm worried about you." Alira turned to face him fully, her expression hard, but her voice soft. "You should not risk everything for me." Paul stepped closer, his voice firm. "I choose to. You're more than what they call you. You're not a prisoner. You're—" He stopped, the words heavy but unspoken. Alira's gaze flickered, something unspoken in her eyes too. But before either could say more, the station's voice announced, "Zeren vessel docking in Bay 5. All personnel, stand by for security protocols." Paul's communicator buzzed. It was Commander Grant. "Lieutenant, report to the hangar. The Zeren want to handle the exchange directly." Paul's fists clenched. He turned to Alira. "Stay here. Lock the door. No matter what happens, don't come out." Alira's voice was tight. "Paul." But he was already heading out the door. "Trust me." The hangar was filled with cold light and tension. A sleek, silver Zeren ship had docked, and from it emerged 3 Zeren officers, their faces sharp and emotionless. Commander Grant stood tall, his eyes flicking to Paul as he arrived. "Lieutenant, good. You can witness the transfer." The lead Zeren officer, tall and dressed in a flowing silver uniform, spoke in a smooth but cold voice. "Where is the captive?" Paul's voice was calm, but his eyes burned. "She isn't coming." The Zeren's gaze sharpened. "You defy the agreement." Grant's face twisted with anger. "Paul, stand down." But Paul's voice did not waver. "No, she isn't property, and she isn't going with you." The Zeren's eyes flashed. "This is not your concern, human." Paul's voice was steady, his heart firm. "It became my concern when you decided her life didn't matter. She does matter, and you won't take her." Suddenly, a new voice spoke, from behind them. "I choose not to return." Paul's heart stopped. He turned and saw Alira standing in the entrance, her eyes blazing with defiance. Grant's voice snapped, "Alira, I told you to stay." But Alira's voice rang clear. "This is my choice." She faced the Zeren officers. "I know your secrets. I know the truth about the war, and I will not be silenced." The lead Zeren's face grew cold. "You are a traitor to your people." Alira's voice was soft but strong. "No, I am something more." The Zeren officer's voice dropped, smooth but threatening. "You know the cost of defiance." Paul stepped forward, his voice hard. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." Alira's eyes flashed. "Paul, no." But Paul's gaze met hers, steady and true. "I told you, you're not alone." The air was thick with tension until a sudden sharp beep sounded from the Zeren officer's communicator. He glanced down, and his eyes narrowed. Another Zeren voice crackled over the line. "Commander, orders from the High Council. Disengage. Return immediately." The officer's lips pressed into a thin line, his voice tight with frustration. "Understood." He turned his cold eyes back to Alira. "This is not over." Alira's voice was steady. "No, it isn't." Without another word, the Zeren officers turned and boarded their ship. Within moments, the sleek vessel undocked and vanished into the stars. The silence in the hangar was thick. Grant's voice broke it, cold and sharp. "You just defied a direct order, Paul." Paul turned, his voice firm. "I protected someone who deserves better than being traded like cargo." Grant's eyes flashed. "You've made a dangerous enemy, both with the Zeren and with command." Paul's jaw was set. "So be it." Grant's lips pressed together, his face unreadable. But instead of arguing, he simply turned and walked away. "We'll discuss this later, Lieutenant." When they were finally alone, Paul turned to Alira. "You didn't have to come out. You Elira's voice was soft but unshaken. I chose to. You stood for me. How could I not do the same? Paul's breath steadied, his eyes searching hers. So, what now? Elira's gaze softened, the walls she had built for so long cracking open. I do not know. But I do not want to face it alone. Paul smiled, warm, real, and without hesitation. Then we face it together. And in that moment, in the silence of the empty hangar, something unspoken passed between them. Something stronger than duty, and deeper than war. The station's alert system hummed softly in the background, but Paul's heart pounded loudly in his chest. Elira stood by the window, her arms crossed tightly, her violet eyes distant with worry. Paul broke the silence. The Zeren ship will dock soon. We don't have much time. Elira's voice was guarded. If they take me, you will be safe. Your commander will not blame you. Paul's eyes flashed with determination. I'm not worried about myself. I'm worried about you. Elira turned to face him fully, her expression hard, but her voice soft. You should not risk everything for me. Paul stepped closer, his voice firm. I choose to. You're more than what they call you. You're not a prisoner. You're. He stopped, the words heavy but unspoken. Elira's gaze flickered, something unspoken in her eyes too. But before either could say more, the station's voice announced. Zeren vessel docking in Bay 5. All personnel, stand by for security protocols. Paul's communicator buzzed. It was Commander Grant. Lieutenant, report to the hangar. The Zeren want to handle the exchange directly. Paul's fists clenched. He turned to Elira. Stay here. Lock the door. No matter what happens, don't come out. Elira's voice was tight. Paul. But he was already heading out the door. Trust me. The hangar was filled with cold light and tension. A sleek, silver Zeren ship had docked, and from it emerged 3 Zeren officers, their faces sharp and emotionless. Commander Grant stood tall, his eyes flicking to Paul as he arrived. Lieutenant, good. You can witness the transfer. The lead Zeren officer, tall and dressed in a flowing silver uniform, spoke in a smooth but cold voice. Where is the captive? Paul's voice was calm, but his eyes burned. She isn't coming. The Zeren's gaze sharpened. You defy the agreement. Grant's face twisted with anger. Paul, stand down. But Paul's voice did not waver. No, she isn't property. And she isn't going with you. The Zeren's eyes flashed. This is not your concern, human. Paul's voice was steady, his heart firm. It became my concern when you decided her life didn't matter. She does matter, and you won't take her. Suddenly, a new voice spoke from behind them. I choose not to return. Paul's heart stopped. He turned and saw Elira standing in the entrance, her eyes blazing with defiance. Grant's voice snapped, Elira, I told you to stay. But Elira's voice rang clear. This is my choice. She faced the Zeren officers. I know your secrets. I know the truth about the war, and I will not be silenced. The lead Zeren's face grew cold. You are a traitor to your people. Elira's voice was soft but strong. No, I am. Something more. The Zeren officer's voice dropped, smooth but threatening. You know the cost of defiance. Paul stepped forward, his voice hard. If you want her, you'll have to go through me. Elira's eyes flashed. Paul, no. But Paul's gaze met hers, steady and true. I told you, you're not alone. The air was thick with tension until a sudden sharp beep sounded from the Zeren officer's communicator. He glanced down, and his eyes narrowed. Another Zeren voice crackled over the line. Commander, orders from the High Council. Disengage. Return immediately. The officer's lips pressed into a thin line, his voice tight with frustration. Understood. He turned his cold eyes back to Elira. This is not over. Elira's voice was steady. No, it isn't. Without another word, the Zeran officers turned and boarded their ship. Within moments, the sleek vessel undocked and vanished into the stars. The silence in the hangar was thick. Grant's voice broke it, cold and sharp. "You just defied a direct order, Paul." Paul turned, his voice firm. "I protected someone who deserves better than being traded like cargo." Grant's eyes flashed. "You've made a dangerous enemy, both with the Zeran and with command." Paul's jaw was set. "So be it." Grant's lips pressed together, his face unreadable. But instead of arguing, he simply turned and walked away. "We'll discuss this later, Lieutenant." When they were finally alone, Paul turned to Alyra. "You didn't have to come out. You." Alyra's voice was soft but unshaken. "I chose to. You stood for me. How could I not do the same?" Paul's breath steadied, his eyes searching hers. "So, what now?" Alyra's gaze softened, the walls she had built for so long cracking open. "I do not know. But I do not want to face it alone." Paul smiled, warm, real, and without hesitation. "Then we face it together." And in that moment, in the silence of the empty hangar, something unspoken passed between them. Something stronger than duty and deeper than war. The station was quieter than usual. Tension hung in the air, and alarms had gone silent. Paul and Alyra walked side by side through the dim corridor, their footsteps soft but their hearts loud with uncertainty. Paul glanced at her. "You sure about this?" Alyra's violet eyes were steady. "Yes. It's time you know everything." They entered Paul's quarters, and the door slid shut with a soft hiss. The room felt small, the air heavy with what was unsaid. Alyra turned to him, her voice soft but clear. "I never told you why the Zeran truly want me." Paul folded his arms. "I figured it wasn't just because of the war." Alyra nodded. "No, it's more. She hesitated, then spoke with quiet resolve. "I am not only a soldier. I am a daughter of the High Council." Paul's eyes widened. "You're royalty." She shook her head. "Not exactly. But my family holds power. And I discovered something they wanted hidden forever." Paul's voice was low. "What did you find?" Alyra's gaze grew distant. "The war between humans and the Zeran. It was started with a lie." Paul felt his chest tighten. "A lie?" She nodded. "The Zeran told my people that humans attacked first. But I found records, hidden ones. It was the Zeran who attacked. A human colony ship. The humans only fought back." Paul's fists clenched. "So they started the war and blamed us." Alyra's voice was soft with regret. "Yes. When I tried to bring the truth to the council, they silenced me. I was sent to the front lines and then captured. To them, I was no longer useful. Or alive." Paul's voice was tight with anger, but his eyes were gentle. "You risked everything. For the truth." Alyra's eyes met his. "And now, so have you." Suddenly, Paul's communicator buzzed. He answered, and Commander Grant's voice came through, tense and sharp. "Lieutenant, meet me in the command room. Now, bring the prisoner." Paul's jaw tightened. "Understood." He ended the call and turned to Alyra. "It's a trap. Stay here." But Alyra's eyes flashed. "No. If they want me, let's face them. Together." They entered the command room, where Grant stood waiting. The large display screen behind him flickered with images of the Zeran ship that had left earlier. Grant's eyes were cold. "So, you decided to disobey a direct order and protect her." Paul's voice was firm. "She isn't a prisoner. She's a witness, and you need to hear what she has to say." Grant's lips thinned. "I know what she has to say, and I know the truth, better than you think." Paul's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Grant's voice was low. "The council didn't just lie to the Zeran. They lied to us too." Paul's chest tightened. "So, you knew." Grant's gaze was heavy with something unreadable. I learned the truth, too late. But orders are orders. We can't undo the war. Alira's voice was sharp. But you can end it, if the truth comes out. Grant's eyes flicked to her, hard and cold. The truth will only break what little peace we have. You think humanity will forgive. You think the Zeren will. Paul's voice was steel. So you'd rather live with a lie than fight for what's right. Grant's jaw tightened. It's not about what's right. It's about survival. Suddenly, the room's alarm blared. A voice echoed through the speakers. Unknown vessels detected. Approaching fast. Grant's face hardened. The Zeren. They're back. Paul's voice was sharp. They're coming for her. Alira's voice was calm but firm. No, they're coming. For all of us. The station shook with the first blast. Red warning lights flashed across the screens. Grant's voice rang out, commanding and clear. All units, battle stations. Paul turned to Alira. We need to get you somewhere safe. But Alira grabbed his hand, her voice steady. No, I can stop this. Paul's eyes searched hers. How? She met his gaze, her voice soft but sure. They want me. If I reach their ship, I can make them listen. Paul's heart pounded. That's. He stopped himself, his voice softer. Dangerous. Her fingers tightened around his. So is losing everything. Grant's voice snapped. You're not leaving this station. But Paul stepped between them, his voice low and firm. Commander, let her go. Grant's eyes burned. You would risk this station for her. Paul's voice was clear. I'd risk it, for peace. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Grant's communicator buzzed. A voice from the bridge. Commander, the Zeren ships. They've stopped firing. Grant's eyes flicked back to Alira. Why? Alira's voice was soft but clear. They're waiting. For me. Paul's voice was low. Commander, we have a chance. Don't let fear waste it. Grant's jaw was tight, his eyes hard. Then, slowly, he stepped aside. Go. His voice was rough. But if this fails, Paul's voice was steady. It won't. In the docking bay, the shuttle hummed to life. Paul stood beside Alira, his voice soft but full of something deep and true. You don't have to do this alone. Alira's eyes met his, and something gentle passed between them. I know, but I need you to believe in me. Paul's voice was firm. I already do. As the shuttle door closed and the stars filled the window, Alira's heart pounded. She had come so far, faced so much. But now, with the truth in her heart and Paul's belief behind her, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. The shuttle moved silently through the vast sea of stars. Alira's hands gripped the controls tightly, her heart pounding. Through the front window, the massive Zeren flagship loomed ahead, cold, silver, and powerful. A voice crackled through the communicator, sharp and commanding. Unidentified shuttle, state your purpose or be destroyed. Alira pressed the transmitter. This is Alira of the Zeren High Council. I come to speak with the overseer. There was a pause, then a cold reply. You are declared a traitor, Alira. Return, and you will face judgment. Alira's voice did not waver. Then let me be judged, after you hear what I have to say. The silence felt endless. Then, with a soft mechanical hum, the Zeren ship's docking bay opened. The shuttle entered, landing with a gentle thud. Alira's heart was steady, but her mind raced. She had only one chance. The shuttle door slid open with a hiss, and Alira stepped out to face a row of Zeren guards, their weapons pointed directly at her. One of them spoke coldly. Follow us. The walk through the ship's towering silver corridors felt endless. They led her to a grand chamber, where a tall figure stood waiting. The overseer. His eyes were sharp like ice, and his presence cold with authority. Alira, he said, his voice smooth but unforgiving. You are brave to return, or foolish. Alira met his gaze without flinching. I have come with truth, and a choice for our people. The overseer's eyes narrowed. Speak, but no, your words may seal your fate. Alira's voice was strong. The war with humans was built on a lie. I found the records. The attack on the human colony was our doing, not theirs. A murmur rippled through the guards, but the overseer's face remained cold. A lie you spread to cause division. Alira's voice sharpened. No, a truth you tried to bury. She stepped forward, her voice echoing. You fear the humans not because they are enemies, but because they are like us. You knew peace was possible, and chose war. The overseer's eyes flashed with something dangerous. You speak as if you understand the cost of peace. Alira's voice was firm. I understand the cost of war. Loss, pain, endless hatred. I have seen it, lived it, and I know it can end. The overseer's voice dropped, cold and cutting. You are a traitor because you have let the human deceive you. Alira's eyes burned with defiance. No, he taught me something you never could. That trust can build something stronger than fear. The overseer's gaze darkened. Then let the humans prove their trust with their surrender. Suddenly, the chamber's screen flickered to life, showing the human station. Zeran ships surrounded it, their weapons charged. The overseer's voice was cold. I have given the humans one chance. They must surrender or fall. Alira's heart pounded. No. The overseer's eyes glinted. If their trust is true, let them surrender without a fight, or you will see how fragile their peace truly is. The communicator crackled, and a familiar voice rang out. Paul's. Alira, the Zeran ships are charging their weapons. Commander Grant wants to engage. Tell me what to do. Alira's voice was tight with urgency. Paul, no, don't fire. Please. There was silence. Then Paul's voice came, firm but soft. I trust you, but we're out of time. Alira turned to the overseer, her voice strong and raw with emotion. Don't do this. If you fire, there will be no turning back. The overseer's voice was ice. Then let the humans prove their peace with their patience. The screen flickered. Zeran ships fully charged, human defenses raised. The tension was suffocating. Alira's heart raced. She gripped the communicator. Paul, wait. A long silence. The human weapons stayed. Cold. The station did not fire. Paul's voice came, steady but tense. We won't shoot first. But if they fire, the overseer's eyes flickered with something unreadable. They hesitate, he said softly. But hesitation is not peace. Alira's voice broke through. No, trust is. The overseer's finger hovered over the command. One word, and destruction would follow. But then, another voice crackled from his communicator. A Zeran officer. Overseer, incoming message from High Council. Urgent. The overseer's brow furrowed. Speak. The officer's voice carried tension. The council has seen Alira's evidence. The truth has been verified. The overseer's eyes flashed with shock. What? The officer continued, voice tight but clear. The council has ordered a ceasefire, effective immediately. Silence fell, thick and heavy. The overseer's hand lowered. The screen showed the Zeran ships, powering down their weapons. Alira's breath caught, her voice soft. It's over. The overseer's eyes, for once, lost their cold edge. No, it is just beginning. The communicator crackled again. Paul's voice, soft but filled with relief. Alira, they're standing down. We're still here. Alira's voice shook. Yes, you are. The overseer's gaze met Alira's once more, but now it held something new. Not defeat, but recognition. You have done what armies could not. You have bridged the war. Elira's voice was steady. No, we did. As the stars burned bright beyond the chamber's window, Elira felt the weight of the war lift, and something new take its place. Hope. The Zeren flagship floated silently beside the human station, their weapons cold and their engines still. The war, which had raged for so long, now hung on a fragile thread of trust. Elira stood before the overseer, her heart still pounding from the moment that had passed. She had stopped the battle, but she knew the real work was only beginning. The overseer's eyes were colder than ever. The council has ordered a ceasefire, but peace is not made with orders. Elira's voice was firm. No, it is made with actions and trust. The overseer stepped forward, his gaze sharp. Then show me, Elira. Prove that the humans will not break it. The communicator in Elira's hand buzzed. Paul's voice, steady and warm, came through. Elira, what happens now? She took a breath. Paul, will you trust me? One more time. A brief silence. Then his answer, soft but certain. Always. The overseer's voice cut in. We will send a shuttle. With you. Unarmed. But if the humans take you hostage, the war continues. Elira's voice was calm but strong. They won't. The overseer's eyes narrowed. For your sake, they better not. The journey to the human station felt shorter than before. When the shuttle landed in the bay, Elira stepped out, alone. Human soldiers stood ready, their weapons lowered but eyes sharp. Then, through them, Paul came forward. His face was lined with tension, but his eyes were soft. Elira, he said, his voice full of something warm and deep. You kept your promise. She smiled softly. And you kept yours. From the overhead speakers, Commander Grant's voice rang out. Lieutenant, bring her to the command room. Now. Paul's eyes met Elira's. You ready? Elira's voice was steady. Let's finish what we started. The command room was tense. Grant stood, his arms crossed, his expression hard. The room's screen showed the Zeren ships holding position, watching closely. Grant's voice was sharp. You brought her here, after everything. Paul's voice was clear. I brought her, because she's the reason we're still alive. Grant's eyes flashed. The war. Elira stepped forward, her voice calm but strong. Is over. The council has ordered a ceasefire. Grant's eyes narrowed. And we're supposed to trust them. Elira's gaze did not waver. No, you're supposed to trust me. The tension felt thick, but then the communicator crackled. Commander Grant, a new voice came through, deep, authoritative. The screen flickered, and the face of the Zeren overseer appeared. The room stiffened. Grant's voice was cold. Overseer. The overseer's gaze was sharp. Commander, I do not expect your friendship, but I expect your answer. Grant's voice was hard. And what answer would that be? The overseer's eyes narrowed. The war has cost both our peoples. I offer a chance, a meeting, neutral ground, your leaders, ours, no weapons, just truth. The room fell into silence. Then Grant spoke, his voice low. A trap, no doubt. But Elira's voice broke through, soft but firm. No, it's a bridge. Paul's voice joined hers. Commander, we have fought long enough. We know war. Maybe. It's time to know peace. Grant's jaw tightened. You trust them because of her. Paul's voice was steady. No, I trust her because of who she is. The silence stretched. Then Grant's voice, rough but clear. Fine, a meeting. But if anything goes wrong, the overseer's voice answered, cold but certain. Then we both lose. Days passed, and in a place between the stars, two ships met. No weapons, no armies, only voices. The room was small but full, Zirin and human leaders, facing each other for the first time without guns. The overseer stood beside Alara. On the other side, Grant stood with Paul. The first words were cold. The next, careful, but slowly, like a ship breaking through a storm, understanding began to form. Alara's voice, clear and steady, guided the talks. She spoke of loss, of hope, and of the truth both sides had tried to hide. Paul spoke too, not as a soldier, but as someone who had learned to see through fear and find trust. And as the hours turned to days, something long thought impossible became real. The treaty was signed, not with celebration, but with something deeper, respect. The war was over. As the leaders departed, the room emptied until only 4 remained: Alara, Paul, Grant, and the overseer. Grant's voice, rough, but almost warm. "You're braver than I thought, Zirin." The overseer's eyes, sharp but not cold. "And you are wiser than I expected." They exchanged a single nod, not friendship, but understanding. The overseer turned to Alara. His voice was low. "You were right, Alara. Peace is not made with orders, but with trust." Alara's voice was soft. "Trust is a choice, and today we chose well." The overseer's eyes, for the first time, softened. "You have brought honor to us all." As the Zirin departed, only Paul and Alara remained. The silence between them was full of everything they had endured, and everything that had begun. Paul's voice was soft. "You saved us." Alara's eyes, shining with something warm and deep. "We saved each other." Paul's hand reached, uncertain but hopeful, and Alara's hand met his. In that touch was everything unspoken. The war had ended, but their story was only beginning. The end. Would you like another story next?